So, here we are. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the new format. Only problem is that I don't know when I'm going to get the cue because we've got really bad connection here. Hopefully, you guys are hearing it clearly and seeing it clearly. Welcome to Pontificating with Pete. Yes, the name change, it is temporary, but we'll, handle the solo format for as long as we can, which is why I have to do this with at least one guest. Otherwise, I'll just be, tooting my own horn and stroking my own ego. Don't want to do that, but as you know, we have a very important show today. We've been wanting to get the show off the ground for about a week now. Oh, that's great, Ray. Great to hear that, and great to hear that, Andrew. So, yes, make sure you smash the like button, share, subscribe to all the things that we ask you to do, because the show must go on, even without our, fearless leader. So with that said, you know that the gentleman I'm bringing on is somebody who kind of was an inspiration in many ways for me getting into the whole podcasting, talk show, if you will. For quite some time, of course, he does real journalism, as I like to point out, because we don't have a lot of that these days. And Lord knows with what's going on in the Middle East, it really is hard to find. So you know him from Status Coup. You know he is delivering the goods day in and day out. And, of course, his documentary about Flint Fatigue. If you haven't seen it, watch it, because it's really good. And we're going to talk about it. Jordan Chariton, welcome back to our first time to Pontificating with Pete.
Happy to be the inaugural guest. Thanks for
You're
having
not. You're actually the third. And Steve
right.
beat you. Steve beat you here.
That's all right. That's okay.
Yeah, that's all good. But third time's a charm. So welcome. And of course, I have no doubt that the reason why we haven't spoken has been this endless amount of work that you've had to be doing, covering not just everything that's going on over in Flint, but obviously everything that's going on around the world right now. It does kind of seem like everything is converging all at once in the worst possible way. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of thought that the stuff that I cover here in America, although it's not the traditional definition of genocide, because when you think genocide, you think of mass, tragically mass piles of bodies. And, massive numbers of people dying rapid fire. But I think there's a real connection between what's happening in the Middle East and, the stories include particularly Flint, which obviously I focused on, because I think there's a lot of slower moving type of genocides with the same intent to kill innocent people, where bodies aren't piling up all at once, but over time, in the case of Flint, East Palestine, a whole lot of innocent people are being killed and dying through government and military apparatuses. So, obviously not minimizing what's going on in Gaza, but I think what's going on in Flint, East Palestine, and a lot of other places in America is a slow-moving genocide where people's lives are being ended prematurely through no fault of their own, due to, the corporatization of our government, basically the sale of our government to the highest bidder. And then when you look over at what's going on in Gaza, at the end of the day, most politicians, I'd say 95% of them are sociopaths, from the federal to the state to the local level, in my experience. Or they went into it for good reasons, but were turned into sociopaths. And you really, in my view, have to be a sociopath. Speaking of Biden in particular, I mean, Trump, if he was president, I think the same thing would be happening, if not worse, in Gaza. But you really have to be a sociopath to consciously, knowingly allow hundreds of people per day to die, to know the massacres that are being done in your name because you have the power with, one press of the button or one, finger moving away from the check to Israel to stop it, and to allow it to continue for political purposes to maintain power. I mean, that's essentially what's going on right now. Biden could have stopped this a long time ago. He's not. I've said it for months. I don't believe the reason he's supporting what Israel is doing because he's a Zionist, as he called it. I don't really think Biden stands for that much. I think he's pretty much been politically flexible his entire career. I don't think he has a core ideology. Same thing with Trump. I think his core mindset is conservative. I think his core mentality is status quo. But I think he kind of throughout his political career has kind of floated as the political winds go, if you know what I mean. But I don't think he is supporting Israel and continuing to support Israel's genocide because he ardently believes in Israel and Zionism. I think he's doing it because he knows his biggest donors, who not only are directly donating to his presidential campaign, not only directly donating to not only his presidential campaign, but the Democratic Senate campaigns, House campaigns, governors' campaigns, are ardent pro-Israel Zionists. It just came out today that Haim Saban, who is the billionaire former, what did he find? Univision or Telemundo. He stole the Power Rangers from Japan and made it a thing.
I remember that.
He's a multi-billionaire. He's been traditionally one of the Clintons' biggest donors, Harry Reid's biggest donor, Chuck Schumer's biggest donor, all of them. Pelosi, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who is a co-chair of Biden's campaign. He's worth $900 million. Both of them are directly donating massive amounts and helping Biden raise hundreds of millions of dollars. So, I mean, follow the money.
It goes without saying that it is a follow the money circumstance. That's why I don't put a lot of stock in what the president said the other day. I mean, call me skeptical, but for over 7.5 months of an actual genocide being perpetrated on these people right in front of our eyes, all of a sudden the president goes on CNN and says, well, I'm not going to be supplying Israel with weapons if they're going to invade Rafah. It's almost like you're waiting for him to say for a little while.
I don't know if you saw, but I sent it to you. His people are now backtracking that.
Of course they're going to backtrack it because ultimately it does come down to dollars and cents. And this has always been, I think, the lost concept of the whole suppression of Bernie's message and what he represented, particularly when he ran the first time. And then obviously, even though the second run was not as fervent as the first, it still had an opportunity to win. And so ostensibly what ended up happening was the complete corporate takeover of the Democratic Party establishment. It was already heading in that direction, but it got put into overdrive. And so with those like the Katzenbergs of the world that you mentioned, which are some of the heaviest hitters in all the politics, I don't think people realize that there are more billionaire donors to the Democratic Party than there is to the Republican Party. So when they more or less hear him say something and then they take them all into, their back room, if you will, and say, yeah, that's not what's happening here. You're going to go out there and you're going to recalibrate, if you will. You're going to repeat what you said in a different way so that people understand that that's not actually what's going on here. I think that there's a lot more sinister things at play. And that's why I've always been very skeptical of people just accepting what's, they assume is going to be a positive development in what's going on over there. And even if there was ever so slightly, you think we're just supposed to forget everything that's happened over the past 7.5 months? That's what they're hoping for. I mean, honest to God, that's what it seems like from where I stand.
Yeah, I mean, I think the chickens have come home to roost. Before October 7th, the polls were pretty bad for Biden in terms of younger people. And, the boomers could poo-poo it all they want. Not all boomers, because there's plenty of older people who watch you, who watch me, and plenty of great boomer age people that I know. But traditionally, the data shows the Democratic Party's, establishment Democratic Party's stronghold is older voters, particularly 65 and up. That was Biden's strength throughout his campaigns. And but it wasn't the boomers that saved the Democrats in the midterms. It was younger voters. Younger voters particularly came out in droves over Roe v. Wade being overturned, which, I can't fault them for. It's obviously a very important issue, but that was in 2022, and that's not as fresh in people's minds. So even before October 7th, the polls showed younger voters were fleeing Biden because he basically abandoned the few promises he made. I mean, when's the last time you even heard raising the minimum wage from Biden, let alone a $15 minimum wage? Raising it. Go ahead.
Well, there are a lot of people particularly in the millennial and Gen Z demographic that have been interviewed time and again, and they've said, look, I do want to protect a woman's right to choose, but who am I to put my selfish interests ahead of the fact that there's literally a genocide being perpetrated by this administration right now. And if they think that they can hold that over our heads going to the polls, it's not going to work. And I agree. I think that there is a point of no return that's been hit for a lot of people, I believe.
Yeah, my point was even before October 7th, I think he was in grave risk of losing because they need young people to come out. They need younger voters to come out. That really helped him in the midterms. And in 2020, a lot of young people held their nose, and not because they were like, give me normal again. We love Joe, but because, they wanted to get rid of Trump. But then you add on top of October 7th, you add on top of what's been going on, between younger people, independents. Let's remember there's like a 10% swing vote that swings back and forth. There was 10% of, Obama voters that switched to Trump in 2016. Then those same Trump voters switched to Biden, a lot of them in 2020. So there's always that kind of, 7 to 10% swing voter that swings between a Democrat and Republican. And then I think a lot of Trump voters who switch to Biden might switch back to Trump. Yes, knowing they don't like, knowing Trump's faults, which there are a lot of, and not loving Trump, but they're just looking at it on the surface level. Well, we didn't have this inflation under Trump. Costs weren't this high under Trump. There wasn't all these raging protests under Trump, even though there was protests under Trump, the George Floyd protests, even though, in fairness, inflation isn't completely Biden's fault. It's a global phenomenon, but he has not done certain things he could have done to bring it down, particularly going after the corporations, which we're clearly seeing now. Half of the inflation is just price gouging. He's done nothing about it. But bottom line, voters don't know the ins and outs like you and I do, or our viewers do. They just see, we didn't have this inflation under Trump. We have it under Biden. Maybe things would be better economically under Trump. And they simplify it like that. So I think he's in trouble. And I get it. Like, listen, I'm not going to fault anyone. It's not for me to fault any woman who decides to vote for Biden because abortion is their number one issue. Who am I to tell them no? Just like it's not for me or anyone to tell an Arab American in Dearborn, vote for Biden because abortion. And by the way, the Democrats, if they wanted to win, and if they wanted to hammer you over the head with abortion, they're not even politically doing it the right way. Bottom line, they had the option to codify Roe v. Wade. They're sending all these fundraising emails. Trump gave you the 3 Supreme Court justices, but they're not actually showing you a blueprint. How are you going to reverse this? How are you going to make it the law of the land? Because the reality is, to do it, they're going to need a filibuster-proof Senate, which they're not going to have. They're not going to get 60 senators, 60 Democratic senators. Then they will not remove the filibuster because the corporations don't want them to. The donors don't want them to. So those are the two pathways. You either have a filibuster-proof Senate, or you have or you remove the filibuster, or you expand the court. He's not willing to do any of those. So you're not giving voters a blueprint. How will you reverse Roe v. Wade? Because you're not willing to do those things I listed.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem that I have seen, this duality, if you will, about how Biden conducts business, and everyone says it's like a slip of the tongue, and then he'll say one thing that'll mean something completely different. The truth is, we do live in a corporate oligarchy, the United Corporations of America, which you can see over Jordan's left shoulder. It's not a joke. I mean, I know it's done in jest, but the truth is that, Citi, Visa, McDonald's, Pfizer. Listen, this is a story about McDonald's that just came out with the shit that they're doing when it comes to union busting, which is absolutely insane. This is the country we live in. And those that look around, it's like somebody who thinks that somebody like Trump is more powerful and influential than somebody like Bill Gates. That is not how this works, people. And there are people that are behind the scenes in the shadows that you can't even see, that you don't even know are there, that have, especially people in the Zionist movement, that as soon as they heard what Joe said the other day, we're like, okay, well, that $100 million you thought you were getting for the campaign, unless you change that tune, that money's going to either go to Trump, it's going to go to RFK, whatever they're going to do. And that's the downside of the realities of what we're living in right now. We are going to play a quick clip because this is what the president said the other day, and we all know he's going to backtrack on it because he's backtracking already. It didn't take long. I didn't think it would.
I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem.
They're in Rafah already. So what is this bullshit about they haven't gone into what? You mean they haven't done a ground invasion? No, they're just raining hell from above, but they haven't really gone in just yet. You know, they're only killing innocent babies and stuff, but, you know, we can accept that collateral damage. At least that's what it sounds like from where I'm standing.
I think there's an important note that I haven't really heard discussed in this. I mean, perhaps I missed it on Twitter and someone said this. That's more of our political thinking. Why are you not? What basically what he's saying is that I will not fund the weapons now if they go into Rafah, because if they go into Rafah, you know, potentially hundreds of thousands of Palestinians could be killed.
But I think that's but
my point is, by saying that, he's basically saying it was acceptable for us for tens of thousands of Palestinians to die, but with our weapons. But our red line is if hundreds of thousands of Palestinians die. That to me is what he's saying, because why would you pull weapons now, but you wouldn't pull weapons then? Well, by default, they made the calculus that we're willing to accept Israel slaughtering tens of thousands of Palestinians. That was in their view, the acceptable collateral damage, which is of course morally disgusting and reprehensible. But now I'm going to say this is my red line because the numbers can go up. Well, I don't know. I've never served, but you know, I know of militaries not willing to take an action if, you know, 4 or 5 innocent people would be killed. You know, certain militaries wouldn't do it. Clearly, they were willing, and by they, I mean Israel and America, because it's one and the same. They were willing if 200 people die, if they bomb a refugee camp, which has happened. They were willing if, you know, in 1 month, 10,000 people die. They were willing, and we're not just talking people. The majority of people who have died are women and children. Yeah. Not to minimize, you know, men dying. Death is death, but we're talking women and children. So at the end of the day, I mean, it's reprehensible. And you know what? Maybe this is controversial with some. I don't think it should be. I think the world felt for Israel on October 7th. I mean, death is death. Innocent people were killed on October 7th. And Biden and Netanyahu quickly let that evaporate, because I was taught, Peter, I don't know about you, 2 wrongs do not make a right. So you cannot say, well, we're defending ourselves, so we're going to go, you know, kill tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians in order to defend us. It's not defense. Anyone with a brain knows that. And as I said, I got in an argument once when I was at the Young Turks. I was in LA visiting, and I was on a panel with Jank and Michael Tracy and a few other people. And we were, I don't remember what specifically was, maybe Syria. And we were arguing about, our involvement in Syria.
I remember.
Our involvement in Syria. And I said, you can't eradicate an idea. What is this, like, erase, you know, the war on terrorism? You cannot get rid of hatred for America. So you have to start looking into, why do they hate America? I'm not defending whatsoever, to be clear, because I don't want my words to be twisted. I'm not whatsoever defending Osama bin Laden or Al Qaeda or anything like that. You can't. What I can say is you have to look at what were in his writings, what were in these people's memos, what was in their brains, and what were they preaching? What was the hate they were preaching, and what was it based on? Well, Osama bin Laden, one of the core reasons he stated he engineered 9/11 was because of Israel's occupation in Palestine.
Right.
That doesn't condone what he did at all, but I'm telling, that was one of the bases. And that's why a lot of terror has happened. And by the way, if they want to talk about national security, Peter, it's May 9th, 2024.
Yeah.
What makes anyone think that in a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, there might not be an attempted attack or a successful attack on America for what we have helped Israel do?
How many innocent kids have to be slaughtered? How many more terrorist cells have been created as a result of the actions and are only going to get worse? We have to go in there and eradicate Hamas. You can't be done.
But you can't. But the bottom line is, for every quote unquote Hamas operative you're killing, you're probably creating 5 new ones.
It's a new Al Qaeda. It's a new ISIS. It doesn't matter. It will just return to something else.
And you and me are friends, so I've talked to you off camera about this. Listen, it's not a secret. My dad's a super Zionist. Both of my brothers went to a private Jewish school. I didn't. I love them, but this is like a core issue we just are on different planets about. For many years before this happened, I just didn't talk to my father about Israel because what was the point? I'm not going to change his mind. He's not going to change mine. So let's focus on the areas of agreement and love. But on this issue, I mean, it's been pretty rough between me and my family since October 7th. And I got an argument with my mom about it. And I just said, like, Ma, let me ask you a question. Put aside Judaism, Muslim, anything. I grew up in Massapequa, New York, on Long Island. Mm-hmm. If Seaford, the town next to us, bombed Massapequa and nuked your house, and God forbid, all 3 of us, me and my 2 brothers, were killed, what would you do? She ended up, well, why did Seaford bomb us? Said, doesn't matter. The reason doesn't matter. What, as a human, not as a Jew, as a human, how would you react to that? And there was just a long silence because I think she got my point. Like, it is human nature and it doesn't matter what the context is. It doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong. If everything has been stripped of you, and you are going to want revenge. Plain and simple.
No argument. Let's finish out the clip and we'll continue.
We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah, artillery shells.
Yeah, that was a talking point, Joe. You said it. Honest to God, it's very cringy at this point to even listen to him speak anymore. I don't know what type of special cocktail they give him to get in front of the camera. We know when it fades, his eyes go very, very thin. And it's again, as I say, the fearless leader of this channel has said time and again, it's a form of elder abuse. Not that I have any sympathy for the president, I don't, but I do know that them trying to trot him out there at this point, I think it's just a reflection of how much things have completely fallen apart. The narrative that's fallen apart, this idea that the current economic and political structure of our country is salvageable in any capacity. It's not. It's like when I tell people, when Trump says that elections are rigged, he's doing it for self-serving purposes. He doesn't care about, whether or not we have an electoral system that is not on the level, which in many ways it isn't. Whether or not we have an economy that's on the level, it isn't. Whether we have a health system, which is corrupt to the teeth. We have a foreign policy, which is dominate the world by any means necessary. I can't imagine anybody on the left who keeps their mouth shut about anything that's going on between in the Middle East or in Ukraine, who has anything to say about the environmental movement if you don't say 2 fucking words when it comes to the shit that we do around the world in terms of military domination. I mean, there is no point in waxing poetic or acting like you're doing anything positive. And I saw this happen in a chat the other day. I won't specify what it was, but I'll just say this. There is a circular firing squad on the political left. And it's just something where you get to a point in life where you realize either you're going to continue to participate in that bullshit or you're going to figure out a way to be productive outside of that that echo chamber, because it is very devastating to see it. And even when you try to draw people away, they cannot seem to get out of their own way. Much like people who say, well, you got to vote for Joe. Why? Why at this point do I have to vote for Joe? Because you have to, because Trump's going to again, if you can't see how this entire system is hanging by a thread and we're just waiting for the moment where it's like tip you over the scale, I don't know what it's going to take, but I just kind of feel we're at that point now where people are ready for something else. And if it wasn't so pathetically poorly organized, especially when it comes to people like Dr. West and Jill Stein, there would be something there. But right now, I just feel like we're circling the drains of hell, and that's kind of where I'm at with all of this. But I do think that we're at a crossroads, and I'm not sure how it's going to unfold. But I don't know if it's going to take a Trump getting into the White House again that's going to get people to finally wake up and realize that the populist left is really where it is, that needs to happen, that we are a decade late, that it needed to be Bernie Sanders in 2016, and we missed the opportunity of a lifetime, that my fucking congresswoman had a fucking hand in, and I will never stop repeating that because it's the truth. But that is where we are. And again, it's like we're in that skewed timeline. It's like the Biff horrific version of Back to the Future 2. That's kind of where we're stuck right now. And I don't really know how we're getting out of it, man. I really don't.
I got two things I want to mention. One of them longer than the other.
Sure.
I'll say the shorter one first. I don't say this to be funny. I don't say this to be crass. I don't say this to be hurtful because, I mean, I don't agree with Biden politically. I think he's pretty abhorrent, but as a human, I wouldn't want anyone to suffer. It really is just outrageous. He is running for president again. I mean, just watch him talk. This is not even to support Trump, because when you hear Trump talk, there's times when he's slurring words, and he sounds like he's, three sheets past pasture, if you know what I mean. Yeah. But the bottom line is, if this man gets reelected, put aside all the things we have in opposition to him. I'm not diagnosing him, but he's clearly beginning his sunset, and he clearly would not be in control. That is objective to the eye and the ear. This is not a slur. This is not a speech impediment. I said that in 2020 when the media was gaslighting about, oh, you're mocking him for his stutter. Well, he wasn't stuttering when he was in the Senate and younger. He wasn't stuttering when he was vice president. He's suddenly stuttering. No, he's gotten old, which happens. It might happen to me that you cognitively slow down, or God forbid, we know loved ones and family members who have had dementia or Alzheimer's. So it's not a knock, but when you reach a certain age, you don't run for positions, or you should not be able to have positions. I mean, look at Bernie Sanders, for example. He's a year younger, but clearly in possession of all his faculties. This is not about, I'm mad at Bernie for certain things too, but I'm just talking from a cognitive standpoint. It's night and day. Same thing with Pelosi. She's losing it when she's in interviews. She doesn't
You're just a Putin puppet. Although Jen doesn't like when I do a woman's impression, but I can't with Pelosi.
But my point is, the truth is, Peter, this is a separate topic, but I truly believe the next world war will be fought within the next 10 to 20 years over water, not oil. Let me repeat. I think the next world war could be fought within the next decade. This man, if he's elected, maybe not be in power during that, but he would be in power when there is serious global hostilities with nuclear powers, when there could be potential terror attacks. God knows, the climate catastrophe and climate refugees. Even if we didn't agree with Kamala Harris, for example, I would prefer her as president than him, just because at least I know the person has their faculties, and that person would be making the decision. I don't know if Biden would be making the ultimate decision, because, I mean, infamously, Reagan during his second term had beginning of Alzheimer's, and it was clear. So it is beyond elder abuse. It is abuse of the country to allow a man that should be enjoying his sunset years with his grandchildren and probably eventually be put in a home. I
am not convinced that he is making this decision unilaterally. I don't believe that he is.
I believe he might not be. My point is, putting aside everything else we've talked about, he clearly is not. He doesn't have much longer Perhaps in body, he will be on Earth for longer, but cognitively, he does not have much longer where he is going to be capable of even taking care of himself, much less the most powerful country on Earth. So that's point number one. And the fact that the media is not taking it upon themselves, because you might, as a journalist, yes, your job is to be objective, not neutral. There's a difference. Your job as a journalist is to be objective, not neutral. So objective means facts first. Objective means don't come into a story already with a conclusion. Get the facts first. And that's the problem with our journalism. We have propaganda, which is, I have a conclusion. Let me find facts to support that conclusion. But as journalists, you should not be neutral when there's a train wreck right in front of you. And that train wreck is the president is clearly on the way out cognitively. And they're standing by pretending, oh, it's a gaffe, this and that. That's point number one. Point number two, which I think is a little longer. I agree with you, but I disagree with you. I actually think everybody, yes, needs to get with the program, that the actions on the populist left. That's where we agree. But I think where we disagree, I actually think too much of the populist left right now is focused on the election. I think it's hard to get out of that mindset because I've been in that mindset for 10 years. And
Sure.
Up until the last 2 years, one of the top things we covered were elections. But I'm beginning to see elections are not going to get us out of this mess. That doesn't mean don't vote. That doesn't mean don't talk about the 2024 election. That doesn't mean don't tweet about it. That doesn't mean don't do content about it. What it means is I firmly believe, and I see it now, even if we got Bernie Sanders in there in 2016 or 2020, I don't think that much would have changed. Not because Bernie wouldn't have tried, not because he wouldn't have had a movement behind him, but the system is too corrupt for one leader to fundamentally change it. The system is too corrupt for one leader, even with a movement behind him or her, to ultimately change it wholesale. I know that's a Debbie Downer sentiment, but when you have a system that at its core is a system, and I hate to give him credit, but Cenk did say this, and this is one of the things that attracted me to the Young Turks back in the day when they were still progressive. Now I don't know what the hell they're doing. We have a system of legalized bribery, and it's built over 40, 50 years, and you can't undo that with just one president because you have a Supreme Court that is corrupt. You have lobbyists that is a corrupt institution. You have laws that are on the books that have deregulated money in politics. So to me, the way to wholesale change, it doesn't mean don't try and get progressives elected. It doesn't mean don't try and get progressives elected. I think we should focus more on the local level than the federal level. But it means what is the fastest way to getting Medicare for all? What is the fastest way to declaring a climate emergency and a dramatically shifting towards clean energy and eradicating fossil fuels? What is the fastest way to slashing the military budget by, in my view, 75%? And to me, that's not in electing a president. That is in a general strike, which is also not something that's going to happen overnight. But at this point, all I could do is look over to examples of other countries that economic protesting, economic boycotts have been the only thing that's changed policy. And I look to France, for example. They tried to raise the retirement age by 2 or 3 years. You had tens of thousands of people out storming the gates. I'm
looking for the vest. I'm looking for the yellow vest.
And I'm not saying general strike to be cute. I'm not saying general strike to get clicks.
No.
I'm saying general strike because at a certain point, you have to look at who's actually making the decision. Because I think, the Young Turks, for example, for a long time, and Jimmy Dore, before he became crazy, said, we have to make the politicians feel uncomfortable. But it's not really the politicians making the decisions, is what I've learned. It's their donors and the corporations. So you have to make the donors and the corporations feel threatened. And how do you do that? You shrink their quarterly profits. You threaten their quarterly profits. You threaten their ability to do stock buybacks. You threaten their ability to do dividends. You hurt their shareholders' ability to get those things. And you do that through economic boycotts, through economic organizing. And frankly, we still cover them because I believe we should elevate these protests. But people have been protesting for 7 months, Peter. in the streets. And pretty much, it's not to take away from their efforts, but very little has changed.
Correct.
Why is that? Because none of the people that are protesting, and there has been millions, are taking economic boycotts, are taking economic actions. I've had this conversation with you. Tens of millions of people across the country over a year protested after George Floyd. There was zero economic boycotts. If 1/10 of those people, boots on the ground, took economic actions against Amazon, big box retailers, corporate banking, you know what happens? The real presidents, the real senators, the real congressmen, who are Jeff Bezos, who are the Walton families, who are Haim Saban and Jeffrey Katzenberg, and the list goes on, they call their employees, the senators, the congresspeople, because the senators are working for the oligarchs. They're not working for us. They're working for the oligarchs. And they say, you got to give these protesters something. Our profits are going down. That's how I truly believe. And I know some people will say, well, Jordan, if we get Bernie in there or somebody in there, they could at least take executive action so we can get policy change. Absolutely. Problem is how quickly, within 20 minutes of those executive actions, you're going to have 100 lawsuits against them, and it's going to be stymied in the court. It's going to go to the Supreme Court, and then it's going to be overturned.
And it's sort of the same problem that we face today, because you have these anti-BDS laws that still keep popping up everywhere, because the system is showing you that if you fuck with capital, that is when they will move heaven and earth to change things. That's why the TikTok ban is coming into play. But credit to the CEO of TikTok, who's saying, no, I'm going to sue the American government for this, and they're probably going to win. Because it's going to cost the shareholders an exponential amount of money as a result of litigation that will take years. But always follow the money. Always, if you know for sure.
Peter, and I'm sorry, I'm very long-winded today, so you feel free to cut me off.
Go.
You have to look at something truly insane right now. This is why I'm saying I don't think, even if you got Bernie in, Jesus in, of course it would be better. It would be a lot better. But in terms of the massive structural change we need, I don't think that would do it. And I'll tell you why. Right now, we literally have, this is how corrupt the system is. We literally have the Supreme Court is listening to a case about blanket presidential immunity.
It's true.
This country was created, right, to overthrow kings. So we did not have kings and queens. But the Supreme Court, most legal experts said the Supreme Court, they're not even going to listen to this. Well, they're listening to it. And now most legal experts are saying, all right, they're listening to it, but they're going to dismiss it 9-0. And if people don't know what I'm saying, talking about, Trump is trying to get out of all of these criminal cases, just saying he has blanket presidential immunity.
Well, he's probably not going to have to worry about that at this point, because it does appear that the documents case, which was always, as you alluded to, probably the strongest one against him, that's already being given a continuance until at least next year. So,
right, but my point is the fact that the Supreme Court, which
even wanted to listen to it,
he's even willing to listen to it, and now that the oral arguments have begun, some of the conservative justices seem to fancy Trump's position. What makes you think if we got a progressive president in there and Medicare for all happened and all these things happened, that it wouldn't just be overturned? Maybe we'd get it for 2 or 3 years, but it wouldn't be overturned by the Supreme Court. That's why I'm saying you have to attack the rot at its root. And the root is our political system has been purchased by money. So we have to go after the money. I'm not talking about being violent, but imagine if Occupy Wall Street, when that happened, imagine if it wasn't just them in Zuccotti Park, but millions and millions of people around the country supporting them in Zuccotti Park by boycotting Amazon, by boycotting corporate banking. This system would be grounded to a fucking halt.
Yeah. And
I've covered Black Lives Matter protests. I've covered climate protests. I've covered healthcare protests. We've been covering, John Farina has done amazing work covering the ceasefire protests. Too many economic organizers are chanting the same shit. Too many protest organizers are chanting the same shit, walking the same blocks, holding up the same signs year after year after year. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over. I mean, hell, the police lynched a man on tape. George Floyd. It was just a different form of lynching. Instead of hanging, it was with the knee on his neck. And nothing has changed after. Actually, it's gotten worse with police. And tens of millions of people protested. There wasn't economic actions behind it. And until we start organizing that, and a general strike, to be clear, it's not going to happen overnight. You need to start on the local level, and it needs to build up. Until we have that, I'm sorry to say, it doesn't matter if fucking Jesus becomes president. It doesn't matter if Gandhi became president, because the Congress would block whomever that president is, or the Supreme Court.
I'm not disagreeing. I do think, though, that where the country was back in 2016, if Bernie had become president, I think we would have been at least on a much better trajectory.
Oh, 100%, 100%. It would be a lot better. It is not to take away from that. And particularly on the foreign policy end, it would be a lot better because the courts and the lobbyists, I mean, the president has exorbitant power when it comes to foreign policy.
Think about this. If Bernie
but I would say if Bernie became president and started doing really great things in the foreign policy term, I'd worry about how long he has.
He had to live. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, there's that argument, but you also have to think about, as much as I don't put enough stock I don't put as much stock into the Supreme Court as a lot of people tend to do, because again, that's a privileged liberal perspective that generally comes to the forefront when it comes to that issue. However, if Bernie did become president, I think if he had at a minimum 2 Supreme Court justices that he could have nominated, I mean, the entire court would look so much different today, because he would have put real labor-minded justices on the court. And that, I think, in a lot of ways would have been substantial in terms of a labor movement that could have been growing in this country. It got stymied under Trump. It is still stymied in a significant way under Biden. I know that the NLRB it has improved, but he killed a railroad strike. And there's a lot of things that you can look to in terms of why we haven't been able to cultivate enough of the left energy. It's not even left, it's just the working class energy, because there's a lot of working class voters who support Trump, but they also support healthcare, a living wage, ending the wars, clean water, all the things from a primal perspective that we agree on. There may be the cultural social issues that are not on the same level. But again, you can work around that when you have the economic components dealt with, which is exactly where I think that would have made a huge difference. And I also believe, which is the perfect transition to our key story here, that if Bernie was president, something would have been done about Flint, Michigan. What would have been done? Would he have called in the National Guard? Would there have been a systematic takeover by the federal government of Flint to ensure that the pipes were, replaced, and there was a, full wellness check of the area to make sure that everything had been taken care of? Same would apply to what's going on in Kalamazoo. I do think that if Bernie was in the commander-in-chief at that time, something would have been done. And yet today, this problem still exists. Colin, I don't know if you recommend one of the 3 clips that you dropped at the bottom, but whichever one you would recommend that we play first, or at least is the primary clip of the 3, I want to get this up and running. So whatever you would recommend of these 3 clips, I'm guessing it's this one with this guy's mugshot being shown. Is that what you recommend? Colin, forget it. He may be doing something. So I'm going to play this clip.
It goes, the first one there is the trailer, and then it goes to in order of those 2. Yeah.
So Jordan with the heavy set jacket on, right?
That would be that's the first one after the trailer. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm just
your black screen. The black screen one is the trailer.
I don't see a black screen one. I see a guy with a mugshot. I see another guy. I see Jordan with the standing in front of the newspaper office. So is it the one with the mugshot?
Oh, weird. Yeah, I assume the one with the mugshot. Then
okay, fair enough. That's what we're going to do. Okay, here we go.
This is the biggest government cover-up I have ever seen. This is the biggest government cover-up of the 21st century. I've only been alive 37 years, but I don't know of any other situation that involved a governor of a major American state, all his top officials, the health department, the environmental department, the treasury department, local city officials of a major American city of 100,000 people, local county officials, the EPA, add in Wall Street banks that were involved with this, ignoring major blinking red lights, ignoring major stop signs. Then once they drove 100 miles an hour past the blinking lights, past the stop signs, then covered up the car crash in real time. I don't know how you call that anything other than the biggest government cover-up of the 21st century. Frankly, I think this makes Watergate look like a picnic.
So in January of 2015, when we started What Are You Fighting For, I needed to come up with a Twitter handle. So we were going through the list and everything, and we settled on Flintgate. And the reasoning was because Watergate was taken. But now, 9 years after that, 10 years into this, it's definitely not Watergate, because Watergate people were held accountable. A president stepped down. Charges were held. People actually were held responsible, and nobody was actually harmed. Nobody was sick. So whatever you want to call Watergate times a million, because there's the initial water switch, then there's the cover-up.
Flint City officials insist Flint River water is good enough to drink, but it's been causing problems with issues at General Motors.
General Motors turning the tap off to the Flint River.
General Motors is making the best decision that they can. The Flint River is in fantastic shape.
Then there's the criminal cases being torpedoed, in my opinion, on purpose.
The judge threw out criminal charges against former state and city officials for their roles in the Flint water crisis.
So nobody had to face accountability. And then there's this, letting people just die.
Right when the Legionnaires epidemic starts, the pneumonia death rate in Genesee goes up. It's likely that the Legionnaires outbreak was bigger than that reported by official authorities.
What do you call that? What do you call a decade of repeated Watergates, repeated times that they're actually trying to, how I feel, kill us off, but while profiting?
You know, we talk about these systemic approaches to how we remove appendages in society, especially in a broken capitalist system where everything is driven by profit, and people who live in poor, desolate areas like Flint, Michigan, that, remember, Flint, Michigan at one time was the beacon of the United States. I mean, obviously it's multiple generations ago, but it goes to show you how these things can change. And there are people that are living in Flint even now in their, twilight years that lived in Flint when this was, the envy of a lot of the country. And they have seen how it's changed significantly since then. And so now what you're watching is how, like you said, all politics is local and it all starts at the local level. And you look at these people in the, you can feel the corruption oozing out of their pores, the way that they, just kind of, say, well, this is just the price of doing business. And if we have to poison a population and kill, hundreds, if not thousands of people in the process, then that's what we're going to do. That's bad enough. But as you've pointed out time and again in your coverage over the past 8 years, it's the cover-up that makes this so much worse. They know what they're doing, and they're deliberately sweeping it under the rug. And this isn't a Republican thing. This is a uniparty thing. This is a capital thing where they are intersected at the point of it's all about the bottom line. And if what we have to do is destroy a population in order to finally gentrify the area, which of course is the goal. I mean, on the one hand, I give it to the people of Flint who are basically telling them to get fucked. Like, you're going to have to kill us if you're going to want your utopia. But on the other hand, it's like, I cannot look away from the suffering that these people are going through. And you've been there more times than one can count to see. And it's probably been this sort of slow drip. Every time you go back, it gets worse. And yet there are people, as we've communicated with before, and this is why I've always faulted the Democrats more than Republicans. With the Republicans, you know what you're getting. They're not going to deny it. There are Democrats who are denying the reality of what's going on in Flint, that everything's fine. Everything's fine. We fixed the water. You're overreacting. This isn't how it is. And all the while, the only thing that matters that from where I can stand is that they're concerned about the current president and the potential heir apparent, which of course is Governor Whitmer, who we know is going to run for president in 28. And we know that Buttigieg is going to run for governor next. We know how this works. And all the while, I'm looking at this and thinking, you have no humanity if you cannot identify. Again, it's one thing to pretend like you don't give a fuck about what's going on in Gaza because it's on the other side of the world. But this type of shit's happening at home. And you're just either willfully ignorant or you're really just no better than the elected officials are that just want to sweep this shit under the rug.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I could talk for days on this topic. There's so much to say, but from a personal perspective, obviously the story is not about me. It's about the people of Flint, but I'll just share. I was there twice over the last 2 months. I've been there 21 times since 2016, but just talking about recently, I've been there twice. I was there in March and April. In March, we were there to shoot the documentary, which Ty Bayless did an amazing job on. He turned it around in less than a month, which is pretty unheard of in making a documentary. He did it in a month. And it really was not lost on me, and it really hurt me personally. You know, whenever I was going back to Flint, a lot of times I drove there, you know, for various reasons instead of flying. And I'd always just start calling people in Flint, like, hey, I'm coming back into town. You know, when can I do an interview? And in March, when I started doing that, you kind of just forget sometimes. Oh, this person in my phone book died in Flint. And this person died. And this person died. And this person died. And before you know it, like half of the people in my phone book that I have Flint in parentheses have died. And then it really crystallized. That's why at the beginning of this, I said there's a slow moving genocide happening. Some people don't like the comparison, but I think it's true. Because genocide, when we think about it, it's an acute situation. But you have to look at the intent also. The intent is to do heinous things. The intent is to inflict death on a people. Maybe you think it's race related, this and that. But to me, there was intent to harm the people of Flint here. And it's just the bodies. It took longer for the bodies to start piling up. But this documentary will show you Flint right now has one of the fastest cancer rates in America. And it's not from the weather. It's from the water. This didn't get any attention in the media. But at one point, Flint, Michigan had the highest COVID case count in the world. Let me repeat, the world. Why? Because it wasn't just like older people that were especially immunocompromised. Every single person in Flint, Michigan, all ages, became immunocompromised because they were attacked essentially with acid water for years. So it wasn't, you know, you can't use a talking point. Oh, it's just older people that are susceptible. Everyone, kids, younger, middle-aged, were vulnerable and are vulnerable to something like COVID. People are dying. Staggering numbers right now. Brain, stomach, and throat cancer is up 300 to 500%. Let me repeat, 300 to 500% in Flint in the years after the 2014 water switch compared to before. People are dying in massive amounts of multiple myeloma. People are dying in massive amounts of kidney disease and failure, liver disease and failure. These are all things that came from the water, and the media is part of this cover-up in my view, but the media only focused on lead. There was a lot of other toxins in that water than lead. There was TTHMs. I don't want to get too scientific, but basically they're carcinogenic, cancerous chemicals that form when too much chlorine is added to water. There was bacteria in that water, Legionnaire's disease, which killed a lot of people. There was E. coli found in that water. There was PFAS, which are those forever chemicals that are not just in Flint, they're all over the country. They're causing cancer. They cause female miscarriages. Not to mention General Motors, DuPont, Dow Chemical were dumping their contaminated waste in the Flint River for a century. I mean, anyone with a brain, particularly Flint residents, if everyone was made aware that they were switching the water, because it was not told to everyone. The media did not inform the masses. The government even didn't inform the masses. Oh, we're switching. You're going to get your water from the Flint River. Flint residents would have said, what? The Flint River? That water that looks green? Like, if you go to Flint, the water looks green in many parts of the Flint River. And it's just sad. I mean, again, I'm not trying to make it about me, but just to crystallize it, on the day of the 10th anniversary, which recently passed in April, I was there. Not a lot of people, 30 or 40 people marching. And I could not escape me. I was literally looking, and all I could think about is all the people that would have been there that day, but have died. Every time I go back to Flint, people I became friends with, people I became really close with. They weren't just sources of mine. I became friends, because you would have to be a sociopath to see these people suffering and not want to help them, to not establish. And they, I believe, valued me because, frankly, I was the only one who gave a damn in the media. I was the only one continuing to come back. I was the only one calling them and taking their calls 5 years later, 6 years, So it's just, how can you call a country a democracy if its citizens are made sick? Let's just say, for argument's sake, it was unintentional. I don't think it was unintentional, but let's even give the government the benefit of the doubt.
Totally unintentional.
Let's say it was unintentional, which I don't think it was. How could you call a country a democracy if the citizens are made ill by government decisions, and the government, instead of helping them, covers it up and leaves them to die? I mean, that is what is happening. Let me repeat. People are dying in massive amounts due to cancer and other illnesses through the toxic water that the government intentionally provided them. If you poison someone, you'd be in jail, Peter.
But if you poison an entire city, they try to make you president of the United States.
So, I'll tell you, Peter, over the years, I don't get it, but I've had viewers email me like mad that I don't cover other things enough and I cover Flint too much. And my answer has been, well, I'm not an octopus. I don't have 8 tentacles to go cover, 100 different things. I said, I wish I had a magic broom that I could cover every community that has poison water. I wish I had $20 million from, like TYT got, that I could hire a staff and a real staff.
You mean the $20 million that they got from Joe Biden's campaign co-chair? Yeah,
yes.
that stuff's important to mention.
But I stay on Flint because I really, truly mean this. I've said it 100 times, so viewers know it. But it's true, because to me, it's not just about one city. I'm not staying on Flint only because it's about Flint.
No, Flint is a symbol at this point.
Yeah,
it's a representation of the country.
I'm not going back to Flint, Michigan, no offense, because I consider it a vacation spot. It's not. I'm going back because, to me, it's the equivalent of, like, if the Titanic sunk and the government was responsible, and the government just kind of like put a tarp over the ocean and pretended it didn't happen. That's essentially, I mean, maybe not the best analogy, but you get my point. You cannot allow the poisoning of Americans to be normalized. You cannot allow for the poisoning of Americans and then the poisoners get off scot-free to be normalized. The reality is it was normalized long ago because the Native Americans have been basically poisoned by environmental toxins dumped on their land forever. But my point is, I don't think it should be normalized. I don't think it should be just, that's just America, and journalists should forget about it. So that's why I keep covering it.
So one other thing that I think is very important just to address, what is the motivation of Governor Whitmer, of Attorney General Nessel? Like, what is the motivation to continue to whitewash all of this? Like, I don't see what the inherent benefit really is. I mean, look, Michigan used to be a very solid blue state. You couple what's happening right now, particularly in parts of Detroit, but specifically in Dearborn, the biggest Muslim population in the United States by a wide margin is in the state of Michigan. And they have made it very clear that Joe is a sitting duck in November. I think that's a reflection of how Trump was able to win Michigan back in 2016. It was also how Bernie was able to win the Michigan primary in 2016, which is actually what shifted the whole election in so many ways. The people of Flint said, we may be Democrats, but we're not playing this game. You're playing with our lives, and you think that we're just going to accept this. We're not. So I think that that is another layer that gets thrown into this mix that I don't think enough people are talking about. What is the motivation of somebody like Governor Whitmer and Attorney General Nessel? We all know what the motivation of Governor Snyder was, who President Biden gleefully accepted his endorsement. I'll never forget that one. I don't know what it is, but I am kind of curious as to, what is the end game here? Like, how do they think they're going to continue to pretend like this isn't going on?
Well, I hope for those who get a chance to watch the documentary, you'll see that the reason, the dark underbelly of the Flint water crisis is Wall Street was involved in causing it. And I believe, it's not that I believe, I know the reason Whitmer and Nessel, in Whitmer's case, has basically abandoned Flint and not followed through on her promises to Flint. And in the Attorney General Nessel's case, who, by the way, Whitmer wants to run for president in 2028, and the Attorney General, who sabotaged the Flint criminal investigation, wants to run for governor of Michigan. So talk about, failing upward, is to protect Wall Street. And it's discussed in the documentary, but I'll try to make it quick. Essentially, the Flint water crisis really happened because there was a privatization scheme to create a totally unnecessary brand new water system. It was called the Carragandi Water Authority. It was a privatized water pipeline that would bring raw water from Lake Huron, which is part of the Great Lakes, some of the purest water on earth in Michigan and surrounding states, bring raw water from Lake Huron to Flint. The thing was, Flint was already getting water from the same source, Lake Huron, for 50 years with no problem. There was no reason for this new water system, but there was money to be had in creating a new privatized water system. So local officials in Flint, state officials in Michigan under then Governor Snyder, they basically hatched a scheme to allow Flint, who was basically almost bankrupt. This was in the early 2010s. Flint had reached its borrowing limit. It was not legally allowed to borrow more money. The only way it could borrow more money was if there was some emergency that would give it an exception to borrow more money. So they basically created an emergency, which was the cleanup of this sludge pit near the Flint water plant. It had been there for years. There was no urgent demand to clean it up, but suddenly there was this emergency created that gave the broke city of Flint an exception to borrow $100 million to help fund the construction of this brand new water pipeline. And who issued the bonds? Who fronted the money? That $100 million. JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and a third financial firm. They were sued civilly, not criminally, which they should have been sued criminally. They were sued civilly in 2020 on behalf of 2,600 children, Flint children, because they didn't do their due diligence in issuing the bonds. In funding the money, they were supposed to make sure that the Flint water plant was equipped to safely treat Flint River water. The best way I can describe it, everybody knows about the Boeing planes right now that are literally falling apart midair. That was the Flint water plant was the equivalent of a Boeing 757 falling apart in air. It was completely dilapidated. It hadn't been used as a full-time water treatment plant in 50 years. It was missing crucial equipment, and it's using the Flint treatment plant to treat any water source, the Flint River or any other water source. In 2014 would be the equivalent of getting on a Boeing 757 with 1.5 wings. So the banks fronted the money for Flint to help fund this completely unnecessary pipeline, and the rest is history. Flint, while that new pipeline was under construction that Flint was going to join to get water, they were using the Flint River They didn't add the proper chemicals. We know the rest. So why does Whitmer not want to do the right thing for Flint? Why did Dana Nessel, the attorney general, in my view, sabotage the case? Because if they actually went to the mat, meaning if they went for criminal justice for the Flint residents, if they charged Governor Snyder with involuntary manslaughter, which the prosecutors that Nessel fired, my reporting indicates they were going to charge him with involuntary manslaughter. Like they were going for the governor, who the prosecutors, the current attorney general fired. They were building a case against the former governor, which would have been historic. There's no governor who has been charged with involuntary manslaughter ever in American history for decisions they made in office. I believe the reason that they have swept this all under the rug is because Wall Street funds the Democratic Party. And if they would have went forward with criminal charges for that financial fraud, these banks would be facing hundreds of millions of dollars in liability because it was bond fraud. The bonds were based on fraud. Not only the banks, the state of Michigan itself would be facing near bankruptcy because the state of Michigan, the attorney general's office, signed off on that scheme that I just described to you. So the state of Michigan would be sued 7 ways to Sunday by bondholders, by Flint residents for signing off on that financial scheme. Well, Gretchen Whitmer, she ran on fixing the damn roads, Peter. She ran on, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, states cannot print money. The federal government can. States can't. The state of Michigan could be facing, we're talking, they settled.
Hold on a minute now. We all know that it's our tax dollars that fund the government. Now, let's let's make that.
Well, our tax dollars actually do fund state government. Even Steve Grumbine says that, not the federal government. But my point is, state of Michigan, the state got away with $600 million in a settlement. If the financial fraud that I described went forward in criminal court, you're talking at a minimum, we're talking $1.5 to $2 billion. It could bankrupt the state of Michigan. And if you are JP Morgan and I'm Gretchen Whitmer, am I going to allow my donors, my benefactors of the Democratic Party to face hundreds of millions of dollars in liability? No, especially if I want to run for president. Dana Nessel, am I going to allow JP Morgan, Wells Fargo to face hundreds of millions of dollars if I want to run for governor? I think it's unfortunately as simple as that. And it pains me that the majority of Americans, hell, the majority of people in Flint, do not know that this is the dark underbelly of what happened here because the media hasn't informed them. And
that is exactly the type of behavior that we saw that was so prevalent with our Governor DeSantis. He basically did the same thing. The second somebody wants to go grab that brass ring, especially if they think that they have a shot at it, obviously in retrospect, he didn't because, Trump has obviously developed such a strong base of support that basically no one can compete against him at this current time. But there were people who thought he could, and they did give him over $100 million. And you saw the decisions that he was making in the state of Florida, whether it was, as a social justice warrior, like with Disney. But there were a lot of economic decisions that he was making that were detrimental to this state, and all for the purpose of thinking that he was going to be the next president. And the same is true for what Whitmer is currently doing and will probably continue to do, if not worse, when she attempts to run for president, and we all know that she will. And this is the same problem that I'm sure is what's prevalent in a state like California, because we all know that Newsom is going to run for president at some point. Maybe he's going to be the replacement for Joe. You never know. No pun intended, no joke intended. But it did rhyme. But those are the types of things that we look at, and we realize that our system is beyond repair. It's just a question of when are enough people going to say that it is time for a unification of the working class that leads to a general strike, that leads to actual economic strangleholds on the very powers that be. The second they're even attempting right now, this is what's amazing, because a lot of times these, any type of the protests that you're seeing at any of the colleges, whether it's, in New York City, whether it's in Los Angeles or any place in between, the one thing we know is that these are totally organic movements. A lot of these people are not wanting to be willing participants in the capitalist system. But the truth is, if you really want to break the capitalist system and turn it into something that's more of a working class system, like a hybrid system, a social democracy, if you will, the only way that's going to happen is if you think like the people in power. If you don't, then you have already lost the plot. Like if you're not already thinking about at these colleges, you want them to divest from Israel, and that's great. And that does need to happen. But now you got to start thinking about, how do we really take control? You got to be talking about divesting from Amazon, from Walmart. You have to be shopping small and buying local. That is how this stuff happens. Like you said, everything's local. It's true. It really is. There are certain luxuries that people don't want to live without or don't know how to live without. Well, guess what? If you truly care, if it isn't just about you, kind of like as you were alluding to before, the Flint story is not about you. It's about us. It's about the collective, if you will. Yes, we live in a society and the collective matters, whether you like it or not. And so unless that type of mindset really takes over and people realize that if you are out shopping, that it would behoove you not to shop at a big box store. Because let's face it, the money that is made at those big box stores, they don't go back into the local economy. They go to the shareholders. That's where it goes. This is a country of workers and shareholders. And right now, if you go back to the days of FDR through JFK, the balance was probably somewhere around 70-30. I would say that at its best, it was 70% shareholders, 30% workers. Today, it's at least 90% shareholders. It may be even higher than that, and about 10% workers. That is not a sustainable system. Not that a 70-30 was anyway. Maybe a 65-35, 60-40. That's a sustainable system. But that is not where we are. And we are nowhere near it. Can't even sniff it. And I do wonder, when are people just finally going to say, I've had enough. I'm not participating anymore. We are collectively going to work together, and we are going to figure out a way to turn this into a worker revolution type situation. But the longer we wait, the more dangerous and devastating it gets. I don't want communism. That isn't the answer. And when anybody hears workers' revolution, they immediately assume that that's what we're talking about. No, we want a system where the workers do have at least somewhat control of the means of production. There is no other way that society can function as a result otherwise. Unless, of course, you're accepting of things like Flint, Michigan. If you're accepting of poisoned water supply, okay, that's on you. But I'm not. And I would like to think that this is also the general consensus of why so much of the narrative that we hear in politics today, it comes from places like North Jersey. It comes from places like not Detroit, but the Detroit suburbs, like Bloomfield and Farmington Hills. They don't care about what's going on in Flint. As long as it's not in their backyard, they don't care. It's just like the people who live in the Pacific Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. They do not care about what goes on in Oakland. Just like people who live in the west side of Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills, in Calabasas, and in Bel Air and in Hollywood. They do not care about what goes on in Watts or Inglewood or Compton. It doesn't matter to them. And if they all drop dead, the only thing that's going to be of concern to them is, who do we get to replace them to do the menial jobs that we need in order to live the way that we do? That is the essence of the infrastructure. And the liberals are so much worse than conservatives when it comes to this, because liberals pretend like they give a shit. But let's not forget that they say what they say, and then their actions always speak louder than words. And you're seeing it right now. You are seeing a genocide in real time, whether it is on a smaller scale in Flint or on a larger scale in Gaza, which is, yeah, it's terrible, but we don't want Trump back in there because, it could get worse. I mean, we know you're dying, on every other day. Somebody in the working class is suffering the ultimate fate of our broken economic and political system. But you don't want to die harder, do you? And that is the mindset of the people that are the most outspoken when it comes to this problem, that should no longer have a say, especially in the Democratic Party. Forget the Democratic Party, just the political arena in general. We do not have a voice in the working class that outweighs the voices of those in the shareholder class. We don't have that. Now, how that's going to change, I don't know. But what I do believe is that you staying on the Flint story is essential to what is the larger narrative, which is, I don't think they're going to be able to sweep the story of the genocide in Gaza under the rug. They're going to try, and they're going to pretend that if they somehow get things to stop or to slow down, that things will go back to normal. There is no going back to normal. Not this time. This is for keeps. This is the change. How it's going to spiral, I don't know, but I do believe that we are living in a very unique time in history, and significant change is going to result of everything that's going on now. When that straw breaks the camel's back, I'm not sure, but I definitely agree with you. I wasn't disagreeing with you. I think electoral politics matters, but in the grand scheme of things, in terms of what needs to happen, it doesn't matter, because if you don't actually mobilize in the way that you need to in terms of the working class uprising, then voting doesn't have any real merit, because you're not forcing the issue in a way that is making the people that are supposed to be representing us represent the people. They represent corporate special interests, full stop, and that goes for both parties. And the very few people that are on Capitol Hill, which is a specific section of the progressive contingent in Congress, which is very small, and Thomas Massey. But again, this is not this is not the country. This is not a reflection of where people are. This is a very small microcosm. It's almost like the complete opposite. The amount of people that are on Capitol Hill fighting to represent us, that's actually the amount of people that should be fighting to represent corporate special interests. Like, that's the differentiation. We have it backwards. The amount of people that should be representing regular people are the people that are currently representing corporate special interests, including my congresswoman, who hopefully our friend is, who I do think has a fighting chance to unseat her. And that's just one, but there are many others. And the truth is, the only way this consensus is going to change is if we recognize that this is what needs to happen. If there is a major protest that is happening right now, as it did at the University of Michigan the other day on behalf of Free Palestine, if the people in Dearborn, Michigan give a damn about what's going on in Gaza and want to see that change happen there, well, then you need to be fighting for that change in Flint, Michigan, because that shit's happening right here in our backyard. Even though it's, death from above that's being rained on the Palestinian people, this is a death by 1,000 paper cuts that's being rained on millions upon millions of people in this country. Flint is just one of the most egregious examples. But as you pointed out, East Chicago, Kalamazoo, St. Louis, New Orleans, and the list goes on. Memphis.
Peter, I just went to East Palestine for the first time, Palestine, Ohio. I got sick within 2 minutes of walking into one person's home. 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Their home is chemically contaminated, just like the rest of East Palestine. It's just another Flint, just a different entry point. It wasn't the water. It was a train of toxic chemicals blowing up. The town should be evacuated. People are very, very sick. People are getting bloody noses. People are getting rashes, burning eyes. A poor 18-year-old girl I interviewed is having seizures. She was healthy before this. I can tell you, I was just there. I got sick. I never get headaches. I had a splitting headache within 2 minutes of walking into a house. That's the chemicals. I never feel delirious. I felt delirious around town. So has John Farina, who's been there. So has Lewis. Hell, Aaron Brockovich got sick there. The CDC sent workers there, and they quietly left. We only found out that they left because they were sick through a Freedom of Information request. They didn't inform the people they got sick. It was found out by a journalist. And they're doing the same thing there. That's why I say, if they get away with it in Flint, that is the playbook for everywhere else. And they are using it, the same playbook in East Palestine. EPA does some bullshit testing. They say, oh, our data says it's fine. Don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe the rashes on your skin. Don't believe your nosebleeds. Don't believe your burning eyes. Don't believe your seizures. Don't believe people are starting to get cancer already there. So this is why I continue to do it. And to tell you the truth, Peter, it ain't easy. I don't know how much longer I will be able to do this, because it takes an extreme toll on me mentally and physically. And I frankly, I don't have enough staff and funding to do it properly. I mean, Colin could tell you, between Colin, myself, and John, I think we're doing the job that a normal outlet, 10 people would be doing with 3. That's not sustainable. I'm trying to do it as long as I can, but I'm 37 and I want to be alive as long as I can for my daughter, my wife, myself. So people need to know the stakes are very high, and I think, Steve Grumbine likes to say austerity kills. I agree. Capitalism, unfortunately, is killing. And water is life. I mean, people think it's a slogan, but it's a literal one. You cannot live for longer than 3 or 4 days without water. And you will die. You will have many, many years shaved off of your life if you are attacked with poison water. That I can promise you, because I've seen it over the last 8 years. I've seen it. I've lived it. I wasn't poisoned, but I certainly know a lot of people that were. And it's sad that can just get swept away and swept under the rug by our government, the media, who I could do a whole goddamn documentary. I could do a whole goddamn book on just the media and their cover-ups. If you saw the emails I have with editors and journalists who have passed or told me why they won't pick up my stories, your eyes would fall out of your head. It's so egregious. Their excuses and bullshit.
You're right.
So yeah,
it is a sad state of affairs where we are today, but often the night is darkest before the dawn, and maybe we will turn it around. I do think that the systemic takeover of our country through corporate special interests is how we get to a point where somebody calls somebody like Taylor Lorenz a journalist. She isn't. She's just a gossip columnist masquerading as a journalist. And there are a lot of other people that come from extreme affluence like her that are the ones that are hired at these outlets to cover news today. The type of news that we're supposed to be getting coverage for are the type of things that Jordan Chariton covers. But you're not going to see that covered in the Washington Post, in the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, in the LA Times. It's not going to happen because those days are gone, because our system is broken beyond repair. It's just a question of when do we get to a point where we say enough is enough. I don't know if we're there yet. I'd like to think we're getting there. Maybe a genocide does it. Maybe another Trump term does it. I don't know. What I do know is that the work you're doing is immensely important and that it must continue, and that Flint Fatigue is a documentary that you all should see. And as I pointed out to you in the private chat, I will say it here. Regardless of your opinion of Crystal Ball, I always tip my hat to her because she covers your work, and there is nobody else with that size of a platform that ever does. So tip of the hat to her for putting it out there, and for the hopefully 50 to 100,000 more people that saw it as a result and are becoming a lot more willing to question the narrative that is thrown at us every day, that we are in very desperate times, very dangerous times.
Yeah, I'd like to just add to that for people that don't know, this documentary, Flint Fatigue, it's an hour, 45 minutes. You could watch it on our website, flintfatigue.com. But we premiered it with Breaking Points, Crystal and Sagar's channel. And they didn't have to do it. I mean, they didn't have to post our 45-minute documentary. They didn't have to, they provided not a lot, but some funding towards it, which I greatly appreciate. Most platforms don't give a fuck, and they just say, "Oh yeah, we'll retweet it," but they put it up. So it doesn't. I don't trust me. I do not agree with Sagar on just about anything, really. There's even things I don't agree with Crystal on. But we got to get out of this petty purity bullshit. I mean, it doesn't matter if you agree or disagree on every single thing. You got to make sure you agree on if your values are in the same ballpark. You could have disagreements, but I give them a lot of credit because not just this, other important stories we've done. If we just put it up on our website, if we just put it up on our YouTube channel for a lot of reasons, particularly YouTube's algorithm fuckery, maybe that documentary would have got 2,000, 3,000 views. But thanks to it being on Breaking Points, I haven't looked recently, but last I looked, it had over 50,000 views. So that's, almost 50,000 more eyeballs that would have seen it. And hopefully, even if there's just a few who see it, who take action because of it, that's what counts. That's why I do this work. I don't just want to inform people. I want to activate people.
And that is that, if I may add, is the full criticism that can be levied if there is any legitimate criticism, because everyone is entitled to have different opinions about different shows, different mediums out there, different platforms, and so forth. If there is one medium where I do believe that the criticism directed at Jimmy is justified, It is when it comes to stories like this. For somebody who claims to care so very, very much about how we need a general strike and a workers' uprising and all this, despite all the different people that he rubs elbows with that people don't like, we could forgive all those things if he was actively promoting stories like this, the ones that really matter. Then he would be given a lot more leeway in terms of what direction he chooses to put his show in. But he doesn't cover this at all, ever. And to me, that's the greatest sin, because before he figured out how to make over $1 million a year, he would have covered this. But whether he believes that this is going to hurt his channel with his audience, he may even have some benefactors that people don't actually know about that he keeps under wraps, that probably doesn't want stories like this covered. Those types of things are possible. We all know why Cenk doesn't cover it, because Cenk took $20 million from Jeffrey Katzenberg. And there are lines that he will not cross anymore.
Oh, I'll tell you why Cenk doesn't cover it, because he doesn't like me.
Well, that's true.
So it's just pettiness. So the people of Flint have to suffer. Their story isn't being told. He won't cut. Cenk TYT won't cover this documentary. Jimmy won't cover this documentary. I'm sure neither of them will even mention that I have a book coming out, which will expose, in my view, based on my reporting, the biggest government cover-up of the 21st century. That's not to be cute. It's not to be dramatic. I'm telling you, you read this book, this makes Watergate look like church charity.
Well, a lot of things today are. You know, the level of acceptance of corruption that has transpired over the past probably I mean, honest to God, the whole 2016 primary and the way that they rigged it in real time, it sort of became this watershed moment in our nation's history where the veil was removed. We saw how corrupt things really are and how corrupt they can get and how much worse they can get. And we didn't put a stop to it when it needed to be. It was like a cancer. You needed to get it early. You didn't get it. And now it's everywhere. And now everyone disputes election results, even if they're on the level. You allowed something of that magnitude to fester, and now everybody is looking at the sick. Now people think that there's no way we could ever have health care, because who the hell could trust the government? Like they could even understand how that shit actually works. It's become so bad in so many ways.
I want to share something behind the scenes before I go. So writing this book was a challenge because, you know, when you're writing a book, you have to make it digestible where people could read it. You have to make it kind of entertaining. And you don't want to just have diarrhea of facts, you know, because really I have a diarrhea of facts, but you want those facts to be a compelling story. But I also wanted to write the book with a family member in mind, because I have a family member, I won't say he's not even like a hardcore Republican. He's just like a hardcore like denialist. He's like, yeah, I think you're dramatizing. He doesn't really believe like government's that corrupt. He doesn't really believe, you know, when I tell him the stuff I've seen and learned, when I tell him what I saw, you know, what I saw and experienced at Standing Rock. Yeah, I think you're exaggerating a bit. Of course, there's corrupt people, but you know, these government officials could be doing other things that make them more money, even though they're all millionaires. So I had him in mind because I wanted to write the book where once I send it to him and he reads it, even he could not minimize it. Even he would get it, how corrupt our government is. So I sent, when I had the draft written, I said, I want you to be like in my small group of people that read this so I could get feedback. He said, all right, it might take a while because he's got a job and some nonprofit stuff he does. He got back to me in 3 days. Read 26 chapters, and the book that's coming out in August is 26 chapters. He said, if assuming everything you wrote in here is true, and I know that you're pretty scrupulous with your facts, this makes like The Sopranos look like I don't know, the Rugrats on Nickelodeon. He told me, like, honestly, I had to put down the book at some points and walk away because it was so outrageous and infuriating. The corruption, because as I was writing the book, I was also reporting and gathering more information. So I had to keep telling the publisher, hey, I need an extension. I need an extension on the deadline because I'm getting more bombshells. And he basically said to me, and this is someone who's kind of like a cross between like neoliberal Hillary Clinton and MAGA Trumper. He's like somewhere in the middle of that. He was like, this is the most corrupt shit I've ever read. If this is what our government is, I want to move. So I tell you that because not this. I want to sell the book, but this is the biggest government cover-up you will ever imagine. There's a lot of government cover-ups, including what you're talking about, the DNC. This is one where they were actively killing people at the same time. And they're still actively killing people. And I think that's the difference. Like people, this is government that kills. Watergate didn't do that. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, for all her faults, didn't directly do that. People are dying. There's a lost generation of children who will never, ever have the life that they could have because of permanent brain damage from lead and other things. So I hope people, watch the documentary, share the documentary. I still believe in word of mouth. So if one person that watches the documentary gets one of their family members or one of their friends to watch it, we just need to wake up more of the masses. Because again, if you watch that documentary, you're not going to come away just about, I need to do something about Flint. You're going to come away with, I need to start asking a lot more questions about my government.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of people are afraid to do. They are afraid of knowing the truth. I think that's why a lot of times it's the old cliche of, would you take the blue pill or the red pill? And the truth is most people say they would take the red pill, but I think they would take the blue because I do think that there are just way too many that don't want to know or don't want to assume.
We might have lost Pete.
I was wondering if that was my end or his end.
Yeah, I waited just to make sure. I was like, is that just me? But hopefully he usually comes back after a couple seconds.
I'll hang around. Although I'm going to go soon anyway, but I'll wait. So I guess Jen is taking a break from the chat as she runs for Congress.
Correct. Yeah. So just we got pontificating with Pete here until then, and if you guys want updates on that side of it, be sure to.
I think you should have called it Purity with Pete. I think that would have been better.
It'd make it all nice and shiny too. Yeah, Peter said he's got his internet kicked him. So I'll wait another minute, and if not, then we'll go ahead and just close it out for him. We'll give him a couple more seconds here.
Sounds good.
Oh yeah, pull up. He took the blue pill, and so he is no longer here. Unfortunately,
sounds like they took the DeSantis pill.
Oh yeah, I'm sure the internet regulation there is great.
Yep.
Politics with Pete, keep it simple. Yeah, I mean we're still in the early stages, so if Pete decides on a different name, it's we can always change it.
I think Purity with Pete is better because everyone on the left has heard the term purity test, so you might just get people clicking in just to see what did Pete turn like neoliberal blue? Is he like Hillary stand now? And then it's just kind of like a play on that. So
it's like he have him like dressed up like a teacher giving a test or something.
Yeah. All right. He texted me saying his internet kicked, so I guess.
Well, all right. Well, thanks you guys then for watching, and obviously thank you Jordan for coming on. And the links in the description I just put in the chat as well for Flint Fatigue to watch that documentary. And we'll be back Monday with Pontificating with Pete with I'm not sure who the guest is, but it'll be some type of guest, I assume. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. Take care.